We don't need a big crowd, we need a lively crowd, that's all. Oh yeah. Alright.
Pastor Trevor Adams, the community champion. Let's take it to warm and welcome.
Thank you very, very much. I had to think twice, who is Bob talking about? Right? People ask me, what do I do and who I am, and I just simply say, I serve. I serve. That's who I am. I think in order to appreciate the Windrush Award, it's important to know the background, the history, as to why the Windrush generation is over here. Why the Windrush generation is over here. Now, we tend to think that the Caribbean history and the Caribbean encounter with Britain started with the Windrush generation, but that certainly isn't the case. The Caribbean was part of the British colony. And history tells us that Britain failed to look after its colonies. It failed to look after its colonies. And over a period of time, there were riots, there were disturbances within the Caribbean. One island after the next, one island after the next. And these disturbances, riots, led to royal inquiries as to what was happening. Why were these riots taking place? And the inquiry highlighted the fact that Britain failed to develop its colonies. Professor Hilary Beckles from Barbados talks about how Britain underdeveloped the Caribbean. The people of the Caribbean knew that the ending of slavery just wasn't the full picture, it wasn't the full story, because the people of the Caribbean had given many years of free labor in order to help build the British Empire. They recognized that what the Caribbean needed wasn't aid. It wasn't aid, it wasn't handouts. But that is what the British government thought the Caribbean needed. It needed aid, it needed handouts. But the minds within the Caribbean said, no, we don't want aid. What we want is development funding. Development funding. There's a difference between aid, which is a handout, where we come cap in hand begging, to development funding. The people of the Caribbean wanted development funding so that they could take charge of their economy, they could take charge of their nation, they could build like how other nations were building. And Britain said, no, we don't want to give you that, we will give you aid. And they created the dependency. And so after the Second World War, when Britain needed to rebuild, there was what is known as the push factor. In other words, because the Caribbean didn't have the type of resource that they needed to develop, and yet they funded Britain's war efforts. After the Second World War, when it came for Britain to rebuild, it was quite easy for Britain to turn to the Caribbean. And people responded because of the fact that the Caribbean had not been developed to the extent in which it should have been developed. And as a result, people from the Caribbean were given the impression that Britain was the land of opportunity. So when Britain called, people from the Caribbean responded because they recognized that there were better opportunity in the light of the underdevelopment in Britain. And so when Britain called, It was the push factor. It was the push factor that triggered off people leaving the Caribbean. It was the pull factor because Britain needed the labour of people from the Caribbean to come over. And when folks from the Caribbean came over, they did not come over. The intention wasn't to stay for a lifetime. The intention was to stay for about 5 years. Generate enough money, enough income, enough wealth to be able to go back and make a difference. But of course, as you and I know, that when they came, the way they were treated was not with respect. It was not treated with dignity. It was not treated with honor. They weren't welcome. Yes, their bodies were welcome and their labor was welcome, but their culture, their insight, their understanding, their intellect was not really welcome. We just want your body. And the children of the Windrush generation that came over, we were not seen as anyone intelligent. We were seen as backwards, as troublemaker when we were into the school, when we went into the school. But we are here to celebrate. Because despite the setbacks, despite the pushback, despite the racism, despite the negative experience, despite the blood, sweat, and tears, I think Maya Angelou captured it correctly when she said, and still we rise. And still we rise. And we are here to honor those of the Windrush generation, men and women who have been through some very difficult challenges, and still you rise. And still you rise. And tonight it's important to recognize this, because this is also part of British history, but it's British black history. And as we come, we want to acknowledge, we want to celebrate, we want to cheer the pioneers. We want to acknowledge those who have gone forth. As the saying says, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And there are many giants in the room, many giants among us who have demonstrated that they, despite what they've been through, they have demonstrated and still arise. And they're leaving a legacy for the next generation. This is the third one I've been to.
That's right.
But not the last. Not the last. And still you will rise.
Wasn't that powerful?
That was wonderful. Thank you for the
Just gave the context. And can I just say,